Hi, Skip Meyer here. I'm about to tell a story about bikes. The reason how this story came up a few years ago, my youngest son came to my house with a unusual bike. Now he's a biker. He rides bikes all the time and has several bikes. And this one had fixed gear on it, and he challenged me to ride it. And sure, I've ridden bikes my whole life. Jumped on it and took off. But it made me stop and think how different bikes are today, but yet they're just the same. They still have two wheels, handlebars, pedals. Nothing's really changed in 100 years. That led me to recall my first bike. As soon as I got off a tricycle, I wanted to get a two-wheel bike. My dad told me, of course, I was too young, too small. Now, this would have been in the early 50s. And today, there's small bikes for my grandkids have them. They ride around all over the place with them. And they probably were around then too, but not readily available to the general public. So when you got a bike in the early 50s, that was your bike forever. And so you got a full size bike. And I was way too small to ride one. My dad was right, of course. I still persisted and begged him and pleaded and hounded him that I wanted a bike, a two-wheel bike. He surprised me one day. He came home with a bushel basket full of bike parts, all rusty and all together a whole bike. And he told me that he would be working on it and help me clean it up, sand it down, paint it, put it together, and take maybe a year or two. And by the time we got the bike together, I'd be big enough, long legged enough to reach the pedals. It was a full size bike, but it was an old bike, one of those old iron things. I never did figure out when it was made, probably in the 20s or 30s. Well, I became a pest. Every night when my dad got home from work, I'd pester him to help me work on the bike. He says, "But you can't ride it yet, anyhow." But that didn't matter to me. And he was a good dad, so he helped me. Pretty soon we got the bike ready for painting. And Dad said, "Well, the bike is going to be yours, so you get to choose the color." And I think I surprised him with my answer. I told him I wanted to paint it black. The reason I chose black was because I used to read a lot. And I just got done reading a book called Black Beauty, which was about a black horse, of course. Everybody knows that book. And I was going to name my bike Black Beauty. I put names on everything. So we painted it black. The bike had one one difference beside it being big and heavy. It had an unusual kickstand. The kickstands today and then in the 50s were on the side. You jump off the bike, kick this bar thing down, and leaned your bike into it. This bike had one that was on the back wheel. It actually was on the axle of the black wheel, and it swung down to the ground and swung up, and you could connect it to the fender. There was a clip on the fender. And so it held the bike upright and the back wheel off the ground. I'm sure you've seen them in pictures and so forth. Well, Dad said he'd look for a kickstand for me, but in the meantime, we'd put this old style kickstand back on the bike. We did so and pushed the bike around the side of the house, and there it sat, waiting for me to grow legs long enough to ride it. I suddenly realized one day that I could sit on the bike on that kickstand. It would hold me. So I carefully climbed on board and dangled my legs down and realized I could reach the pedals when they were on top. Now, when they were on the bottom, I was way too short, but I could hit the top one. So I gave it a push, and the other one came around, came up, the back wheel started to spin. And so I started doing that, practicing every day, keeping the back wheel going, and got pretty good at it. One day, Dad came home and walked around the side of the garage, and he saw me making the back wheel go around, even though I wasn't following and hitting the pedal when I was on the downside. He said, "I think you could probably ride the bike. You want to try it?" I, of course, said, "Yeah." So we took it off the kickstand. Dad held the handlebars, and I climbed on it, and he ran alongside of me, keep me from falling over. And off we went, and there was no stopping me then. I could make the bike move, go down the street, even though I didn't reach the bottom pedal. There were two problems there, starting and stopping. When Dad was around, of course, I was no problem. He'd catch me and help me get started. But when he wasn't around, I found a 5-gallon pail to stand on, and I could get the bike going. And that's how I started it, got that problem fixed. Stopping, I'd just jump off the bike and let the bike crash into a tree or something. Those old heavyweight bikes, you couldn't hurt them. Let it fall to the ground, whatever, until I got big enough to reach the ground with my legs.